Hi, I'm Teresa from Phoenix Gate Crafts, and today we're discussing the similarities and differences between knitting, crochet, and Tunisian crochet. So, let's start with the old one, shall we? Knitting. So just a quick note, this is a quick overview. This is not a detailed explanation of how to knit. This is more about choosing the right craft for the desired outcome. And some of the similarities, some of the differences, some of the unique properties of each craft. So although I will show a little bit of each one, this is not by any means a how-to guide. I will link videos in the description box so that you can find some how-to videos if that's something you're interested in. But, you know, knitting is very old. It's at least 6,000 or 7,000 years old. There was a different kind of craft done before knitting in many places that had a very similar result to knitting. So it's a little hard to determine exactly when knitting got started. But the main premise is that you actually have to cast on stitches. So I have some cast on and I knitted up a little bit to just get this started. But these stitches right here are live stitches. If I were to let one of these off of my hook without having something there to catch it, it would very likely just kind of drop and you'd wind up with this thing called a ladder. So you want to not drop any stitches. And it is a very simple process. There's a lot of different handholds for this, but it's loops within loops is basically what knitting is. You can do various stitches. This is the basic knit stitch. There's also what's called the purl stitch, which will create a knit stitch on the back. Because right here, this is a purl stitch. And as you can see, you wind up with what's on the back on the front. And then you can keep knitting. And this one doesn't go very fast. It's a fairly slow art form. And pretty much everything is based off of the knit stitch, the purl stitch, and the yarn over. You could have a knit two together where you knit two stitches at the same time. You can do a yarn over. You can do various other things to create a little hole. Through a combination of different combinations of stitches, yarn overs, and everything, you can get some pretty interesting patterns. So let's show some actual patterns. This is a shawl that I made. And it's a pretty good example of some of the options. It's not comprehensive. But you can knit, you can knit textures, you can knit lace, you can do color work, you can do different kinds of lace and textures. This is a type of color work. It's a little bit thicker right here. That actually involves doing what's called slip stitches. I think it looks pretty neat. And it all depends on the stitches you do. Now I think you'll notice that a lot of this looks like most clothes. Most clothing that you wear, even this, is knit. I don't know if you can see this particularly well. Let's see. Here you go. You can see that you have tiny little knit stitches. Most fabric that you wear is knit fabric. You can see the little V's. This is then printed on because this is, these are pajamas. The joy of having this new setup, I don't have to get dressed or wear makeup. And the V's on my jammies are the same V's that you can see right here because these are all loops within loops. Knitting has actually been mechanized for well over a century. I think, don't quote me on this, I haven't done the research recently, but I think the first steam-powered knitting machine was made somewhere around the Industrial Revolution. But there have been low-tech knitting machines for centuries. And you'll notice that knitting has a very nice drape. It drapes in a lovely way and dangles, and it stretches. It does stretch quite a lot. That is partly the nature of the material. This is wool, but it is also the nature of the knit stitches that they'll stretch this way and they'll stretch this way a little bit. Now, this is, I think it's DK weight. But this right here is fingering weight. And yes, I dyed all of these yarns. This is just a scrap piece. I showed the socks I made with this yarn in a different video. But as you can see, you still have little V's. V, 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 V. And it's just loops within loops. And you can make lovely garments. Very common to knit in knitting are a lot of garments. Socks are a lot of garments. You know, you see here I make a lot of shawls. Shawls are kind of my go-to brain-dead project. But sweaters are most commonly knit. Hats are commonly knit. Mittens and fingerless mittens and a lot of that type of stuff. You can still do washcloths. Like, you can do anything in knit, but most popular are worn items. Also notable to mention with knitting is that you don't really get holes unless you want holes. So with crochet, you're still doing loops within loops. That doesn't actually technically change with any of these crafts. Also, technically with all these crafts, you can make the same stuff. It's just that some things are better than others in various crafts. I think this is plenty. So, the basics is you start with a chain. That's what this little thing is. And then what you do is you stick your hook in a loop, pull up a loop, and then pull through two. This is a single crochet, which is the most basic stitch. And as you can see already, this is making a thicker fabric in the same weight of yarn. It's a little less drapey, and it doesn't necessarily have holes in the single crochet fashion. Just like knitting, there's actually only a few stitches, but how you use the stitches really affects things. So everything is actually based on chains and single crochet. We can use chains to move around, and then we can do extra yarn overs to make different stitches. This is the actual most common stitch. Not the most basic, second most basic, but this is the double crochet. And this is where you can wind up with some holes. That's why a lot of people who crochet are very careful with baby blankets, because little babies' fingers and toes can easily get tangled in little holes. So having something like knitting where the holes are at least less obvious, probably better for baby blankets. But as you can see, crochet is much faster than knitting. It's not a slow poke. And an additional benefit to crochet, I mean, pulling out is very easy. You just remove your hook and you're not very likely to lose any of your stitches. But 1, 2, 3, 4. Oops, slip stitch together. 1, and then we're going to single crochet, and then we're going to half double crochet, and then we're going to double crochet, and then we're going to half double crochet, and then we're going to single crochet, and then we're going to, I think we'll slip stitch, and then we will and as you can see, I made a little petal. Crochet does shaping and shaped items so much better than knitting. You can get a little 4-leaf clover, or a flower, or a star, or a heart very easily. And as you can see, I just made a 3-leaf clover. And this was spontaneous. This is just a BS pattern I really quickly pulled off. Like, I've made flowers, stars, moons. It's very easy because there are different size stitches in crochet. It is very easy to make little appliques and different decorations for items. In fact, my husband actually has a sweater I made. I knitted the sweater, but all the really crappy like light bulbs, Christmas trees, Santa Claus, presents, all this other stuff, it's all crocheted because 1, it's very fast, and 2, you could do a lot of different designs and shaping with it. And although technically knitting can do various shapes, you can technically do toys with knitting, but amigurumi, which are specifically crocheted toys, are much easier to do because shaping in crochet is so much easier. It's even thicker. Now this is worsted weight, and it is a shawl, and hey, look, it's got a pocket. It doesn't dangle quite the same way as knitting does. And you can see that it's still a little bit more holey. Even if you've got really good tension, it just kind of separates. It does stretch, and a lot of it, again, is with the fabric, not just the yarn. This is acrylic. And it does wind up just kind of thicker overall. I do have a bit of texture stitch in this one, but it still winds up thicker. Looking at this one, you can see that it's thicker. This is fingering weight. So this is, you can see that this is thicker than this one, just by looking at it. Like, it behaves differently. You see how it squishes differently. And that's because when you knit, because it's loops within loops, you just have a little bit on the back. That's like the top and bottom of each loop. So the front, so this winds up thinner. The way a crochet is, you have what looks like a little knot. So this is actually more three-dimensional. It's got 3 strands here instead of just overlapping one strand over another. You're actually kind of tying 3 or 4 little loops together in a double crochet like this. And that's what makes it a little bit thicker and a little less drapey. And honestly, crochet is a little bit more blocky with the colors. It doesn't look too bad on this one, but you can see how, like right here, we've got this dark purple color and then a couple stitches of the light color, then it goes to the darker color again. And when you have holes in this one, they are typically pretty square. This one has a unique design element because it is actually a shaped stitch, which does happen in knitting, but it doesn't happen as easily. In order to do this kind of thing, you'd have to probably knit 2 rows in order to get it. But the rest of these holes, these are squares. There's actually a technique called fillet crochet, where you have these empty squares and then you put a design in them based on which squares you fill up. So crochet has a lot of different easy shaping options, but it is thicker and it is a little bit more holes. And it doesn't drape quite as nicely. So a lot of people who crochet do a lot of decorative items. They'll do appliques, and they'll do a lot of bags and decoration items. Like I'll throw up a picture here that I'll take of the star bunting that I've had up in my house for forever. So you can do a lot with it in terms of decoration. You can still make garments. I do not recommend making socks out of crochet. The way these stitches are, with how thick they are very bumpy and knobbly. You will feel them under your feet, and that can irritate at the very least, or you can actually get blisters. There are some crochet socks. I do not like them as much as I like knit socks. That is a bit of personal preference, but that is kind of generally how a lot of people feel about it too. Last but not least is Tunisian crochet. And as you can see, this one is quite a bit different because it's a hook, usually on a string. You could have just very long hooks, like you could have very long knitting needles, but it's honestly easier with a little string. Tunisian crochet is just like being smack in between knitting and crochet. You start very similarly to crochet, where you do some chains. I'm just going to make a little swatch. I think that's enough, actually. All right, and then what you do is you pick up stitches, very much like you do with knitting, and you keep them on your hook as little loops. Oops. You can still do yarn overs and stuff. There's various textures you can do, but this is just the basic stitch, which is called the Tunisian simple stitch. And then when you come back, you pull over and yarn through loops, and this part is like crochet. And then there you go. This is basically a cast on. So now what you do is, these are my active stitches. There's a lot of space between them, but that's just because they're active and I'm still meant to use them. As I pick up loops, because you pick up loops from the front, this pulls that loop up and pushes this top portion down and into the back. And that is how Tunisian is really different. And that's actually how it also makes a very dense bunch of stitches. And then the last one, you can kind of go like that. And then you always chain up one, and then yarn over and pull through two. And as you can see, this did something to the row below it, kind of the way knitting does. That tightened up this row, and now this row is loose because this is the row we're working on. So we're going to do it again. And okay, I think I did some. Yep, I split stitches there. Your video about splitting stitches coming soon. And then we go, and we go, and we go, and we go, and we go. And now, as you can see, this is curling like crazy. This happens because we are pulling these stitches in the front tight while the extra fabric is in the back loose. Now knitting does curl, especially if you are doing stockinette stitch, which is that flat, smooth stitch on the front. Back to this one. As you can see, this is, you see that this is stockinette, that's what stockinette is. But you see how it really likes to fold up. Now the way this doesn't just automatically fold up is first it's blocked, and I have a border. That's why you usually see on the edges of knitting there's either garter stitch or something that really holds it. You know, you've got ribbing, garter, seed stitch are very popular. So that's how it kind of is able to lie flat. That, and then with proper blocking techniques, you're actually able to pretty well hold whatever it is so that it fits properly. Those same techniques work very well in Tunisian crochet. And that's what I've done here with this shawl. Now there's definitely a front and a back. This is the back of the Tunisian simple stitch. This is the front, and as you can see, you can get various textures. This is the honeycomb stitch right here on this end. And as you can see, this is dense. I used a thinner yarn with a bigger hook, and it still wound up a very dense fabric. And that is the nature of Tunisian crochet. Now, because on Tunisian crochet, you do a forward pass and a reverse pass, it is very hard to work in the round. Knitting and crochet can both be done in the round, so you just join the front end and the back end of your work, and then you just keep going around and around in circles. So, you know, when you're knitting in the round, you can connect the front and the back of your work together, and then you just keep working in circles. That doesn't really work with Tunisian crochet. But you can do shaping. Like this is a triangle shawl. It is very much shaped. And as a result of this shaping, you can actually still make garments. You're just more likely to have to sew them up with this versus if you choose to do a top-down raglan style knit sweater, you don't have to do any sewing, or most crochet, you don't wind up doing very much sewing either, because the nature of it, it kind of works out very nicely. Those are the big differences. I find Tunisian crochet really good for items that you want to be really thick. So shawls and scarves are really good. I'm not very good at Tunisian crochet, so I've only ever crocheted flat stuff in it. But you can do hats and everything. You can do hats, mitts. You can do a piece sweater. Those kinds of things are really good for Tunisian crochet. And just to give you a quick comparison to crochet, this is the same fiber. So this was crocheted intentionally tightly, but even so, this is still a little stiffer than this. Not by a lot. I did get a smaller hook for this. But as you can see, this just kind of, it stretches a little differently. This still stretches. The stitches still stretch, and the different fiber you use will do this. But it is a lot harder to get Tunisian crochet drapey. But it does have a very rug-like quality. That's actually how Tunisian crochet got its name. I think Tunisian crochet was invented in someplace in Europe, like France or something. But it looked like the Tunisian rugs. And that's why it's called Tunisian crochet. Not because it was actually made anywhere outside of Europe originally. So, just to give you an option. And you know, you can do things that look very similar in all three. Like Tunisian crochet can actually do a knit stitch. So if you want something that looks like knit but is way thicker, Tunisian crochet is the way to go. You can also do these crafts in any combination. I typically keep them separate, but if you watched my video on variegated yarn spectrum, and I'll link that somewhere, but you'll see that I was doing knitting on the bottom and did a whole bunch of different things with knitting, and then I crocheted out of the loops. You can crochet a piece, and then if there's something that you want to knit, you can just pick up some loops and start knitting. Very commonly with Tunisian crochet, Jada and Stitches did a Tunisian crochet calendar blanket a few years ago. And what she did was she would do a Tunisian crochet square and then a regular crochet border around the edge to help keep the Tunisian crochet flat. So there's lots of different options for what you can do. And here's the best advice that I can give if you're doing a project. Picture what you want the drape to be, what you want it to feel like, how loose and all that. And in addition to picking your fiber, pick your craft. So the more crafts you know, the more options you have, and the higher your ability to actually get the exact thing you want. Anyway, I hope you found this handy. Happy crafting. Bye.